Welcome to tonight's meeting. This meeting is being broadcast live on the Council's YouTube channel. My name is Councillor Rachel Layton and I will be chairing tonight's meeting. If I lose connection and can't chair the meeting at any point, then the Vice Chair, Councillor Rebecca Harvey, will take over for me. I'd like to remind all participants of a few housekeeping points. Please keep your microphones muted unless you are speaking. When prompted, you may indicate you wish to speak, but please wait until I call on you before speaking fully. I also ask that members of the committee please keep their questions and comments brief and to the point. If any councillor leaves the meeting or loses connection during an item, we will pause and wait a few minutes for them to reconnect. If a councillor is not present for a substantial part of the discussion, then they will not be able to vote on that item. The quorum for this meeting is 4 members of the committee. If we have fewer than 4 members in attendance, I will have to adjourn the meeting. I'll now move on to item 1 on the agenda, which is apologies for absence. We have apologies from Councillor Asif Siddiqui. If I move on to item 2, which is roll call and declaration of interests. So I'll now do a roll call to confirm the members in attendance. I will call on members in alphabetical order. When called on, please say present and note any declarations of interest. If you don't have any declarations, please just say present. So, Councillor Ahern.
Present.
Councillor Harcourt.
Present.
Councillor Harvey.
Present.
Councillor Carmel.
Present and Chair, with in the interests of full disclosure, I should say that I have met one of the speakers on item 7, Ada Lewis House. I don't believe that I have spoken to this person in the last 15 years, but I do know them. But in the interest of full disclosure, I thought I'd better say that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Carmel. Councillor Perez.
Present.
And Councillor Thorley.
Present.
Okay, thank you very much. In which case then, I'll now move on to item 3, which is the minutes of the meeting held on the 2nd of February. So I'll now call on each member in turn to confirm the minutes of the previous meeting. If you would agree the minutes, please say agreed. If not, please say not agreed and explain why. So Councillor Ahern.
Agreed.
Councillor Harcourt.
Agreed.
Councillor Harvey.
Agreed.
Councillor Carmel.
Agreed.
Councillor Perez.
Agreed.
Councillor Thorley.
Agreed.
And I also agree the minutes. So I'd now like to move on to making a slight amendment to this evening's agenda. So in view of the number of registered speakers on some items, I propose that the order of the agenda is changed so that the items are heard in the following order. And so that new order will be 50 Brook Green, followed by Ada Lewis House, followed by Plymley Place, followed by the TPO. Do I have anyone to second that suggested amendment? Thank you, Councillor Carmel. Okay, in which case then, we will begin with our first item for the evening, which is 50 Brook Green. If I can ask the presenting officer, Neil Edgerton, to please introduce the report. And if all other members and registered speakers present could just pop their microphones on mute while Neil delivers that presentation for us. So Neil, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. I hope you can all see the screen.
We can, yes, Neil, thank you.
All right. So the application relates to 50 Brook Green and is for change of use from office to 33 residential units across blocks 1 to 5, including partial demolition and extensions of ground and first floor to blocks 2/3 and a first floor in block 4, partial demolition and alterations to block 5, the redevelopment of a 3-storey block with bike storage, refuse storage, parking and landscaping works to trees. Show the site here. It is on to the northeast of Brook Green, shown in red there. It's within the Brook Green Conservation Area, and many of the majority of buildings on site are locally listed buildings of merit. The site was originally a Victorian school. However, since the 1980s, it has been in office use, originally for the Inner London Education Authority. The site has a public transport accessibility level of 6A. Some history, rough history of the site. There have been a number of applications under the permitted development legislation between 2017 and 2018 for change of use of blocks 1 to 4 to residential units. There was also an application for block 5 to be changed to residential units. These were refused by the council, and there was an appeal held, and the appeal allowed permission for blocks 1 to 4 to convert into 40 residential units under the permitted development legislation. However, part of the requirement for that was the development had to be completed by April 2021, which has not been possible due to site changing ownership and obviously the current pandemic. Therefore, the current application has been submitted by the applicants. I'll just take some views of the site, some aerial views, which highlights the various blocks. Block 1 is the closest block to Brook Green, and then obviously it's quite a linear site. Again, just giving some further aerial views. This is the front entrance from Brook Green. As you'll see, go through the gates there. As you'll see, there's quite a narrow archway providing access into the site. Again, some images of inside. This is block 2 and 3, the existing front elevation. Again, block 2, 3, and 5. 5 at the far end. This is the existing rear elevations viewed from Oxford Gate, residential development. Again, more views there. Again, this rear elevation of block 2 and 3. Block 4, this is the front elevation into the site itself. You can see at the moment there's currently a significant amount of off-street parking provided for the offices. And then the existing front elevation of block 5, which is to the far end of the site. Again, this drawing just gives you an indication of the blocks and their location. Again, so block 1 is down where the entrance is on from Brook Green. And again, that's just showing it from facing south. This is the site plan. And you see, this is block 1 here with Brook Green there. Blocks 2/3, block 4, and then block 5 at the end. This is an indication of the landscaping plan for the proposed development. It's a mixture of hard and soft landscaping, and also indicates the sort of cycle parking shown here, here, and here. 3 disabled parking bays that will be provided, and then landscaped areas throughout the site. This screen shows the extensions that were previously approved and also form part of this application. So the extensions in pink, they're to the rear of blocks 2 and 3 and to the rear of block 4, were approved in 2019, and those permissions are still current. Then there's the blue extension shown here were approved in 2020, and obviously they are still extant permissions until 2023. That permission also included a small single-story security building to the front of block 1, which was originally part of this application. Unfortunately, it wasn't included in the description of development, and therefore that element has been removed from the proposal. There are a number of additions on the addendum which delete the references to that from the report. again, that's just again from another angle showing the extension. So you can see the long pink extension first floor level to the rear of blocks 2 and 3, etc. And again, this drawing highlights where the extensions are behind blocks 4, behind blocks 2 and 3, block 3 pavilion, and block 5. So if we go to block 1, which is the main block at the front, that is the front existing elevation. There's no changes to that elevation. That building will be converted into 6 flats plus a gym in the basement area, which is for the use of the residential occupiers of the site. Move on, then blocks 2 and 3 and block 3 pavilion. This is again some photographs showing those at the moment. And this, excuse me, shows the layout for that block. And there will be sorry, lost my piece of paper. There'll be 26 flats. No, sorry, wrong piece of paper. Apologies. Block 2 and 3 would, sorry, convert 16 residential units on that block. Apologies for that. And this shows part of the front elevation of the site. Unfortunately, quite a big elevation, so it's not crisp and clear as it could be. And the remainder of the elevation, front elevation there. To the rear, then again, this shows the elevation. You can see up here there's screening for a roof terrace that is proposed, and then there'll be some new windows installed along here at the first floor extension. It's the other end of that elevation. Again, this gives an example, clarifies a little bit further. It shows the proposed first floor extension here and the slight increase in the roof size here by the pavilion building, and shows the terrace at roof level. And again, this shows a further, the pavilion extension here, which is larger single story with a extensive green roof as annotated. Some indicative images then from the front facade shown here into the site. You can see the grassed areas and the new hard landscaping. And then to the rear, these are views from Oxford Gate, and you see the new first floor extension along here. Block 4, which is a much smaller block, showing the images there. This will be converted into 4 residential units across the ground first floor level, and this includes an extension at first floor level here to the rear of the building. It's fairly utilitarian or plain rear elevation proposed, and then to the front the original character building is retained, and that's it looking onto the site. Block 5 is to the northern end of the site, and this shows the existing building. You can see here a large tree, or the trunk of the tree. There are 4 TPO trees on the site. They will be retained as part of the development, and if you can see here, this indicates that at ground floor level the extension will be built around this tree. The tree will be growing up through there, and the residential units will be around that site. I mean, there'll be 7 residential units in that. So again, this is just a isometric drawing indicating it. You can see the tree coming up through there. And again, the pink highlights the extensions that will be added as part of the development, saying these extensions already have consent from where it was originally proposed to extend the office space. And then just a couple of existing and indicative view there showing the pavilion block at block 5. The application submitted a viability assessment advising that they didn't feel they could finance any affordable accommodation on the site, and we had that independently assessed. And whilst our independent assessor agreed that the site would come up with a deficit, officers have continued to negotiate with the applicant, and as a result we have negotiated a financial contribution towards off-site affordable housing provision of 1.35 million. Section 106 agreement that would be covered in the Section 106 agreement. We would also be looking to prohibit future residents from having parking permits to park on the street, and there would also be a Section 278 agreement for works to set back the existing entrance gate, upgrading the footway and the curb line. There would also be local sill contributions as detailed there, 121,000, and a mayoral sill of £48,000. There have been a couple of objections from local residents, particularly sort of concern about overlooking loss of privacy. There are conditions attached to the permission with regards to the new windows on the Oxford Gate side of the development to make sure there's obscure glazing provided. So there's concerns about parking, so we are not going to be letting the occupiers have any parking permits to reduce the impact on the street. As was indicated at the start of the presentation, the entrance onto the site is quite a narrow archway through block 1. Currently, the refuse and delivery arrangements vehicles park outside and the refuse is brought out to it. That is proposed to be continued under if the permission is granted, the management would bring the bins out to the lorries. Also concerns are raised about fire safety. Again, arrangements would remain as existing. Obviously that archway has not been altered. However, the applicants have confirmed that they have been liaising with fire consultants and the design will comply with the functional requirements of the building regulations, and it'll be met by a fire engineer design approach, which will go through a building regulation submission and a process entered with the fire service regarding this issue. And it's envisaged that there will be sprinkler protection to all flats within the scheme to control fires and compensate for the increased fire service setup time, enhanced detection for all flats, and dry rising mains provided to all stairs. So officer consider the application and on balance recommending it for approval subject to the completion of a satisfactory legal agreement. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Neil. Okay, in which case, if I can now move on to our registered speakers for this evening. So if I can start with Matthew. Matthew, if you wanted to take the opportunity to unmute yourself, I can see you already have, wonderful. So Matthew, thank you for coming along to address Planning and Development Control Committee this evening. Matthew, you've got 3 minutes in which to address committee, and I'll interrupt you to let you know when you've got 30 seconds remaining, if that's all right. Okay. So whenever you're ready, take it away.
Okay, thank you. Obviously, I represent the 13 houses in Oxford Gate most affected by the proposed developments. And given the time allotted, I'm really just going to focus on 2 really important points. And the first is to challenge the whole idea of the case for a change of use to these new extensions. To pick up on a point that Neil said, the extensions that were approved in 2019 were for commercial use only in the context of keeping the whole area in a mixed use setting. Now, we're aware that the council view mixed-use settings as a valued and enduring feature of the Oxford Gate conservation area. The developers came for a change of use is based on the idea that this area cannot be used for commercial activity. That is quite simply a falsehood. This area has been used for commercial activity for decades, and the claim for change of use is based on a marketing approach whereby the developers marketed this space at an enormous, over 36, probably 40% premium to the market rate for office space. We conducted our own survey. The market rate for business premises in this area is about £40.5 per square foot, not the 55 that the developers are proposing. And that is actually for fully furnished office space. To be blunt, this makes a mockery of basic economics. It's like me saying, I've got this thing, I'm going to ask people to pay massively over the odds for it, and then I'm going to turn around and tell you that there's no demand. I really don't understand with a straight face how the committee could possibly accept that this is a legitimate change, case for change of use. I'd also point out that the council has already delivered over 145% of its housing requirements according to the recent housing delivery test. So you shouldn't feel under any pressure to change the balance of use in the conservation area on that regard.
Matthew, sorry to interrupt, you've got 30 seconds.
Okay, my second point simply reflects to the building of the additional residential space on a new floor. That floor will be 12 metres from our own front windows. The council's own guidelines is 18 metres. So that's a third of the whole guidelines. We believe that simply the provision of a few obscure windows is not going to do enough to secure our privacy. We believe that the developers have basically provided a great deal of misinformation in what they put forward to you.
Matthew, if you want to... Thank you. You're finishing up.
I'm just going to finish. Genuinely, for the elderly and families in Oxford Gate, I beseech you to look through the planning request and refuse this specifically on the grounds of change of use.
Okay, thank you very much, Matthew, and thank you for coming on to address committee this evening. If you want to pop yourself on mute for me. Wonderful. All right, thank you so much. Okay, if I can now invite speaking in support of the application, Dawood, you also have 3 minutes in which to address committee, and thank you for coming along this evening. Like I did with Matthew, I'll give you a 30-second warning, and if you want to start whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Dawood Zakaria, and I'm speaking as the applicant, Leah Space Limited, a family business. We've worked hard with your officers in a constructive and helpful manner over the last 7 months to reach a positive recommendation for the first application of a substantial number of new residential homes in Brook Green since Windsor Way and Oxford Gate. We bought this site with the intention to create a communal workspace campus. However, the impacts of the pandemic have totally obliterated the commercial office market, which forced us to look at other forms of development. We spoke with local residents and determined that a 100% residential scheme would be far better and popular for the area. In July 19 and February 20, 2 previous applications for offices and residential were approved. This application does not change the envelope of these approved schemes at all. We're a family business and want to be part of the local community. Therefore, we consulted widely, and I'm delighted to highlight to committee that we had significant support. 27 residents supported through an online survey, with many expressing their relief that instead of around 600 comings and goings with a commercial mix, there will instead be just 33 new homes. On the basis of the positive committee report, we are very pleased that officers agree that the scheme is acceptable and can deliver the following benefits as clearly set out in the report. 33 new homes for Brook Green in a mix of sizes, including 33 being family-sized. The site has been assessed by officers and the council's independent affordable housing consultants, who conclude that the provision of on-site affordable is not financially viable. This position has been agreed by officers and the external consultants. Nevertheless, and in recognition of the Council's policy, we have negotiated with officers the maximum reasonable contribution towards off-site affordable housing being 1.35 million, which can support many affordable housing projects across the borough. Very careful consideration has been given to our neighbours through the orientation and reduction in units to avoid adverse amenity impacts. We are proposing a conservation-led, sustainable, attractive and well-designed scheme which has been supported by officers. We have initiated discussions towards a number of positive initiatives in the local community with the Friends of Brook Green. The development will be car-free except for 3 disabled parking bays. We are also proposing improvements to the vehicular entrance by moving the access gates to avoid conflict with pedestrians. Finally, there will be sustainability enhancements to the buildings, including an overall improvement to surface water runoff by 90 to 95%.
So that's 30 seconds.
In conclusion, the scheme has been assessed by the officers against the relevant policies within the development plan and found to be acceptable. It is therefore respectfully requested that members uphold the positive officer recommendation and grant permission tonight. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you so much for both of our speakers for coming along to address committee this evening. Okay, I'll now move on to members' questions. So are there any members who have any questions on this application that would like to kick us off? Councillor Harcourt, I can see your hand there. So if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question to begin with. I've got a few other points, but we'll come back to that. The first one is to do with the affordable housing. It says on page 67 in 6.34, HO3, policy HO3 states, in exceptional circumstances, a financial contribution may be required to provide affordable housing off-site. Could you tell me what is exceptional? What circumstances are exceptional here? Or are you just saying that if something is financially not viable, that constitutes exceptional?
Neil, are you able to take that for us?
Okay. Sorry, bear with me. Yeah, I mean, officers, you know, are obviously very keen in terms of the council, the council's policies to try and get as much affordable housing as possible. I mean, we did obviously look at the applicant's viability statement, which obviously demonstrated there was a deficit. We also considered our own independent assessment, which, whilst it did agree there was a deficit, there was quite a difference in the level of deficit. And I think, you know, there's always scope to negotiate on these matters, and therefore it was felt appropriate in this instance to not necessarily just accept that no affordable housing could be provided, and therefore we entered into negotiations with the applicant to try and, I guess, push this element to try and see if we could achieve some level of affordable accommodation. I mean, you know, we're aware obviously there was the permitted development approval was granted 40 residential units on the site. There was no affordable housing there, obviously, and that doesn't come into the permitted development legislation. However, when you have a planning application, it's a separate matter looked at on its merits, and we just considered having paid close attention to both the viability assessments that there was some scope to push a little harder, so we were able to negotiate in this instance.
Okay, thank you. I understand how you've reached this particular point, but what you haven't answered to me is what constitutes exceptional circumstances, and are these exceptional? The simple viability, is that exceptional or not? And also, the next point that follows on, I'll give you that now, is the amount that you've negotiated is actually, what is it, 23%, equivalent of 23% affordable, which is well below our policy.
It is.
Sorry, Neil, I can help if you through the chair. These are exceptional circumstances. Yeah, I can clarify and confirm that. But in terms of viability, it is an important and, to be quite frank, a weighty material consideration in these circumstances. We had an independent viability consultant who we worked very closely with, and we did push them, as we do with all our independent viability consultants. We insisted that sensitivity testing was carried out. So we put in optimistic sales values. We were trying to interrogate and push down the build costs. So we really went at this as much as we possibly could to test the viability, because it's not a perfect science and variables do go in there and nobody ultimately has a crystal ball. We certainly pushed it as far as we could. Our independent consultant was absolutely convinced that this scheme would not deliver affordable housing on site. It simply would not be deliverable. So we then entered into a negotiation with the applicant around achieving some form of commuted payment. The commuted payment represents around about a 30% off-site contribution if it was to be delivered as part of one of the council delivery schemes. For example, we feel we could provide around 9-10 affordable units that would meet the most needy in terms of our client list within the borough. So the developer, although financially and viably this doesn't add up, to be quite frank, they have taken an optimistic view on it. They're prepared to accept below the standard industry profit target on schemes of this nature. So in that sense, we felt these were exceptional circumstances, and it was acceptable against our affordable policy in the local plan.
Okay, thank you.
Harcourt, there was a follow-up question. What?
The follow-up was, which I think you've touched on, which is about why is it, 23% affordable, which is, or the equivalent of 23%, which is below policy.
Okay, I hope I answered that. I mean, we've used the calculation against our own delivery programs and what that potentially could provide as part of one of those programs, and therefore what it represents as a kind of tangible unit off-site. And it is approximately 30 to 35%, obviously depending.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. That's all for now. I've got a few other lesser points, but that was the main one. So,
thank you, Councillor Harcourt. Councillor Carmel, can I come to you next?
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is a site I actually know well, and a site that more decades ago than I care to admit that I'd visited, and with my then car, which was a Renault 5, even I found it difficult fitting through that exceptionally narrow archway. I've had a look at the report, and I may have missed it, but the first question is, have LFB signed off on the fire arrangements yet? Because I would tend to be loath to, on a site as tight as this, to vote in favour of any site where LFB have not categorically told us that they are happy with the situation.
LFB were consulted on the application, but have not responded to the council. I mean, the fire arrangements will be dealt with under the building regulations, as I outlined earlier, and the fire consultants are, will be liaising strongly with the fire service. And as I say, they were talking about sprinkler protection to the flats, enhanced detection, and dry rising mains provided to all stairs as a minimum.
Well, Mr. Edgerton, as you and I know with our long memories, this committee has insisted on better provision beforehand, but that is not a deciding factor at this stage. I heard, I think it was it Mr. Merritt's contribution to the debate. Can you just confirm that his assertions as to the window-to-window distances are correct, and notwithstanding the obscuring of any glazing, what consideration have officers given from the change from office use to fully residential on light pollution to the neighbours?
The distance between the windows where the new windows are being installed at first floor level are correct. So there is an existing permission for those extensions and windows there. Obviously, our policy ideally prefers it to be 18-metre distance. Where it isn't, then they need to be designed to prevent the overlooking loss of privacy, thus the condition about obscure glazing. And if on the addendum that condition has been amended to make sure that a sample is submitted for approval. In terms of the existing offices, there are no planning controls over the hours of use of those offices. Therefore, the offices potentially could be used 24 hours a day, or could be used, very similar hours to people who be using residential properties. So officers do not consider that there's would be significant harm as a result of the change of use.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Redington. Just because there are no controls and a potential office user could use them 24 hours a day, doesn't lessen the impact on evening use that a fully residential scheme that would put in. You talk about the extant permissions that would have extended the building and brought the window-to-window distances closer. Can you just confirm that those permissions have been fully implemented and are a material planning consideration, or if they are currently an unimplemented planning permission and therefore they can be disregarded from the weighting that we give to this application?
Those permissions are unimplemented at the moment, but they obviously are still valid and could be implemented if they decided to obviously not go ahead with this particular development.
So how much weight should we give to an unimplemented planning permission, which I believe is shortly to expire and is unlikely in the current time frame to be capable of implementation?
Through the chair, I would advise that it is a material consideration, as Neil has identified. It wouldn't be appropriate for officers to direct committee members, in my view, how much weight to attach to what you consider, or we can tell you what's material, I should say, but I don't think it's appropriate for us to start to direct you how much weight. Obviously, that's up to the decision maker, how much weight they attach to material considerations, but we can factually advise that they can implement it. It is a material consideration, and therefore we do have to give it weight in a balance against the development plan policies. As indeed, also, I should point out that we do have an article that the only requirement for them seeking permission for the change of use is as a result of an Article 4, which prevents permitted development, i.e. people carrying out conversions of this nature from office to residential without planning permission. Another material consideration we've also had to take into account is the fact that come July, that Article 4 falls away due to new regulations from the government. Therefore, a change of use of this nature could be carried out at the property in principle without planning permission.
I'm grateful, Mr. Butler, for that full explanation, but just to clarify, we're not in July yet. We're deciding it on the current rules and regulations. Can you inform me, it's in the report, but it slipped my mind, when does the extant permission for offices expire, please?
There's two applications. One of them expires in September 2022, and the other one expires in February 23.
Thank you. I'm grateful, Mr. Edgerton. My last point is on block 5 and the tree that is proposed to be, as far as I could tell from the drawings, enveloped by the building. Do we have an arboricultural report to say that this TPO tree will actually survive being inside a building?
The applicants did provide a tree report, which has been assessed by the council's arboricultural officer, who raised no objections to the proposal, subject to the development being carried out in accordance with the details contained within that tree report.
Thank you very much, Mr. Edgerton. Chair, despite some reservations, I am encouraged by the answers that officers gave, and I will be supporting this application.
Thank you, Councillor Carmel. Councillor Harvey, I saw your hand up earlier. Did you have a question that you wanted to bring?
Hello, I did want to ask about the distance between the windows and the existing properties in relation to what Matthew had raised as a concern, but I think Councillor Carmel kind of asked that question already.
Okay, and you're happy with the answer you've been given? Okay, thank you. Are there any other members who have any comments or questions on this application before we move on to a vote? Councillor Harcourt, I think you had a few other points you wanted to raise.
Getting used to Zoom rather than Teams. Yeah, just a couple of points. The issue of the distance between windows has been raised and answered. That's fair enough. That was one of the points I was going to ask about. The other one is to do with outlook, and we're talking about block 4 and the potential impact it has on Windsor Way. Wasn't quite clear exactly what the problem was there. Perhaps, Mr. Edgerton, you could explain that or get the diagram up so I can see exactly what the impact is going to be.
Okay, just bear with me. Block 4. Sorry.
This is item 6.112.
6.112.
Neil, we'll just give you a moment to share your screen again.
Yep. Right. So right, so block 4, right, I mean, I think the concern raised there is relating to, I guess, the boundary wall here, which would be raised as part. part of the first floor extension, and this obviously is number 10 Windsor Way. So I think the concern was the impact on the garden and on the residential property, and obviously the as I said, it could block part of the aspect for the balcony at number 10, but the balcony is already quite enclosed, and the additional solid face presented by the extension is not very significant. So and also the daylight and sunlight report for the properties on Windsor Way demonstrated that the development would not harm them, so therefore no objections were raised to that extension in terms of the outlook.
Okay,
I'm not sure if there's more. Might be.
Councillor Harcourt, does that answer that question?
Yeah, one very quickie and then a couple of points. Is the basement pre-existing, or is it does it have to be excavated for the gym?
It's a pre-existing basement.
Right, okay. I suppose the only other areas that I have any concerns about are there's a couple of properties that are purely north or northwesterly facing, which is a bit of an issue, and then the floor space requirements and the fact that there's no sort of child space. And we've had this discussion before about where there's insufficient space, saying, well, there's space in the local park over the road. It doesn't quite always fit to me with a private space where parents can actually look after children and feel that they're safe rather than sending them across the road. And so those are the other points. I just wonder whether the two northwesterly facing flats, the lack of floor space, the slightly less than policy affordable housing, when you add them all together, do they constitute, and I'm questioning this in my own mind rather than necessarily for you to answer, whether that adds up to a reason for me to vote against or vote for?
Yeah. I mean, obviously what we're talking about here is conversion, obviously, of an existing building of merit. So trying to fit into that sort of historic building and trying to, I suppose, get the flats in. So I mean, obviously, of the 33 flats in the building, 2 would be northwesterly facing out of the 33. So I mean, I think given it's a conversion, I think on balance we were reasonably comfortable with it. I mean, the unit, the flat sizes all exceed the London Plan sort of minimums. And yes, we did sort of discuss with the applicants, about providing some child space on the site. They've obviously done an analysis, and there are, I think it's 11 family-sized units included with the development. That was using the GLA sort of formulas. There'd be 8, approximately a child yield of about 8 children for the site. At the end of the day, the applicants felt they couldn't provide that space on the site, and I guess officers on balance, given the historic nature of the site and the proximity of Brook Green with the various facilities there, considered that in this instance we would accept that. I mean, obviously that, I do appreciate your point. It's something you'll obviously have to weigh up, whether you can tolerate that or not.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Neil. Councillor Harcourt, was there anything else?
No.
Okay, Councillor Thorley, I can see your hand up, so if I can come to you next.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think the committee's covered most of my topics, but if I could just touch on land use. Mr. Barrett mentioned in his representation he felt that I think it was Fairbrother, had advertised the space at an inflated price per square foot. I think about £55 a square foot he referenced. Now, officers' justifications, I read it in the report for why they view this change acceptable is in part because of the Grade A office space that has been approved nearby on Hammersmith Road, and also the view that the office space that is currently there, within the limitations of being building and merit and so on, wouldn't provide the kind of quality office space that they think is required in the area. Could I ask officers two questions? First of all, did we independently assess the Fairbrother report? And secondly, what overall will be the net loss of employment use on the space?
We did not have the marketing report independently assessed. That was assessed by officers who investigated and looked at that report. In terms of the office space, I mean, at the moment, I think there's a gross internal area of around about 3,700 square meters of office space on the site. Obviously, as you say, there's quite a bit of office space that's been through committee and in the pipeline for Hammersmith Road. I think probably 70, 80, 90,000 square meters of office space, including affordable office space coming online. So officers were comfortable in this instance that there would not result in a lack or insufficient stock of office accommodation in the area.
And what's the net loss of employment on site? So there's obviously new facilities like a gym, which I assume will have some servicing requirements, but I'm guessing there's a net loss.
I'm afraid at the moment the site is vacant apart from part of block 1 on the front. They have a lease that will be expiring in July. I'm afraid I don't have the figures of the numbers of people who work on the site at the moment.
Okay. And just on the gym, I assume that gym is solely for the use of residents.
That's correct, yes.
Rent. Yeah, fine.
That's correct, yeah.
And I suppose linked to the gym, the one thing from my reading of the report, I think I'm right in saying that only 2 of the flats have outdoor private amenity space, so 31 do not. Yeah, I do accept that obviously Brook Green is very, very close, but we've just gone through a large period of time when, for whatever reason, you're not allowed to spend a sustained period in a park. Why, on balance, are officers of the view that the shortfall in private amenity space is acceptable?
I mean, there is, obviously within the site itself, the landscape, both hard and soft landscaped areas, there's very limited. There's obviously the 3 disabled parking spaces. If required, there'll be very little vehicle movements throughout the site. So there is still communal external space that can be used there by the residents for exercising, socializing, hopefully once we're allowed to do that. So I think that really allowed officers to come to that decision on that balance.
And linked to the landscaping, the applicant reference that it would be very a high quality scheme in terms of sustainable urban drainage. But I did notice there was quite a lot of hard landscaping. Can you tell me what assessment officers have made about the sustainable urban drainage system proposed for this site?
Yes, I mean, details have been provided and assessed by our colleagues who have specialties in that area, and I mean it is set out in the report that there's proposed measures for surface water runoff. There's tree pits, permeable paving, an attenuation tank underground with flow restriction. So officers are quite comfortable that the site will deal properly with that. I mean, at the moment the site is pretty much hard cover anyway, as shown in the photographs earlier. So there's car parking for 25 approximately cars on the site. They will be removed, so it allows then the permeable paving to come in, which will help with those matters.
Thank you. And last one, if I may, Chair. I think I noticed in block 2 and 3 that there's a lift. is that an existing lift or will that be installed? And if it is to be added into the site, if I read the plans correctly, because you did the nice way you went through it quite fast, where is the plant equipment linked to that? What I'm concerned about is, if you will, additional height going on the roof. That's really what I'm asking about.
Yeah, those are existing lifts.
Great, thank you. That's all I've got, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Thorley. Neil, do you mind unsharing your screen for us?
Sorry.
No problem, unless we're using it to demonstrate or show members something.
Yeah.
Sharon, do you mind just putting yourself back on mute for me, please?
Oh, sorry, what do you want me to do? I'm so sorry.
Just to pop yourself back on mute for me, if you can. Thank you. Great. Councillor Carmel, I can see you did have your hand up. It's gone back down again. I wondered whether you wanted to raise a further point.
The point I was made was sufficiently covered by Councillor Thorley,
Okay.
therefore, and sufficiently answered.
Wonderful, thank you. All right, before we move on to voting, does any other member have any other questions that they would like to raise or anything else they'd like to clarify? I'm not seeing any hands. Okay, so in which case then, we'll now move on to the voting. So I'll ask if each of the recommendations in the report are agreed, then call on each member in turn to give their vote. Please respond with either for or against or not voting. So if I can draw your attention first of all to recommendation 1 in the report, also noting the addendum, and you'll find recommendation 1 on page 38. And that reads that the committee resolved that the Chief Planning Officer be authorised to grant permission upon the completion of a satisfactory legal agreement and subject to the conditions listed below. So, Councillor Ahern.
For.
Councillor Harcourt.
Against.
Councillor Harvey.
For.
Councillor Carmel.
For.
Councillor Perez.
For.
Councillor Thorley.
For.
And I also vote for that recommendation. So that is that recommendation agreed. If I can now draw your attention to recommendation 2 in the report, also noting the addendum. And again, you'll find that on page 38. And that recommendation reads that the committee resolved that the Chief Planning Officer, after consultation with the head of law and the chair of the Planning and Development Control Committee, be authorised to make any minor changes to the proposed heads of terms of the legal agreement or conditions, which may include the variation, addition or deletion of conditions. Any such changes shall be within their discretion. So Councillor Ahern.
For.
Councillor Harcourt.
For.
Councillor Harvey.
For.
Councillor Carmel.
For.
Councillor Perez.
For.
Councillor Thorley.
For.
And I also vote for that recommendation. So that is both of those recommendations agreed, and that is that application approved. Okay, I might like to invite Daoud and Matthew, if you wanted to either leave the meeting or turn your cameras off, either is fine. But thank you very much for your time this evening. If I can move on to our next item, which is Ada Lewis House. And if I can ask the presenting officer, Jacques Duplessis, to please introduce the report. And Jacques, I can see that you're already sharing your screen. That was very quick, so thank you very much. Whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chair.
Oh, we've lost your screen again. Sorry there.
It's fine.
Great, yeah.
If you can see that, perfect.
We can see it.
The application is Ada Lewis House, which is located at number 2 Palliser Road. The site can be seen there on the screen in red, and it is north of the Queen's Club. From Palliser Road and Barton Road to the north, and Comarach Road to the south. Resolution to grant planning permission was received on the 3rd of March, where committee resolved to grant permission reference 2019-2351 for the demolition and erection of a replacement 5-storey building to provide 36 residential units with private gardens, a communal courtyard and cycle storage. The agreed heads of terms, as you can see there, is 100% affordable housing, a energy and sustainability offset of approximately 57,000, a infrastructure contribution of 10,000, and travel plans and Section 278 works secured. This is the scheme that was presented and agreed by committee in March last year. This is a view from Palliser Road, and it could see it's the corner of Barton Road and Palliser Road. This is a different view from the proposal from Comarock Road, which can be seen there. The current request is to vary the affordable housing tenure agreed by Planning Committee in March last year, and that is to change the 9 London living rent units to become 9 shared ownership units, and also to confirm that the agreed 18 flexible London living rent or shared ownership units will be delivered as 18 shared ownership units. In the table here can be seen the changes made in red. As you can see, the London affordable rent units, which is 9 3-beds, there's no change to that. The London living rent, which changed to shared ownership, although the maximum household income cap would remain at 60,000, no more than. And the flexible units, which is this 18 units, they would be delivered as shared ownership units with no change to the household income. London living rent homes are for middle income households who would rent and then build up savings to buy the property. This can either be through shared ownership or outright purchase. It is expected that London living rent units will change to shared ownership after a period of 10 years. On the other hand, shared ownership units is a type of affordable home ownership when a purchaser takes out a mortgage on a share of a property, which is generally 25%, and pays rent on the remaining share. I would at this point like to draw members' attention to the addendum. There are 2 changes to include publication London planned policies, the first on page 95 and the second on page 99. The other change relates to comments received from residents last week, which was unfortunately too late to make it on the agenda print to the date. A total of 35 representations have been received. However, the additional comments do not raise any new issues beyond the original objections. This brings me to the officer recommendation, with the first being that the committee resolves that the heads of terms for the planning application agreed by committee on the 3rd of March 2020 be varied to allow the 9 affordable London living rent units to change to 9 shared ownership units with a cap of 60,000 household income. The second recommendation can be seen there, which is to allow the Chief Planning Officer to make minor changes to the proposed heads of terms. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Jax. If we can move on then to tonight's speakers speaking in objection to this application. So if I can invite Jane Spooner and Sarah Taylor. Jane and Sarah, if you want to put your cameras on, that's fine, you can do, but you don't have to. But if you want to take the opportunity to unmute your microphones. Jane and Sarah, you've got 5 minutes between you. It's up to you how you want to split those 5 minutes. I'll leave that up to you. But I'll let you know, whoever's speaking, I'll let you know when there's a minute remaining. So whoever's speaking first, Jane or Sarah, which of you's going first?
Jane.
Jane, wonderful.
I'll go first, and I will take just 2.5 minutes. Thank you, because that's what I was told I could have. Thank you very much.
All right, Jane, whenever you're ready, go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Jane Spooner of Flat 15 Palliser Court, Palliser Road. I object to the proposed redevelopment of Ada Lewis House at number 2 Palliser Road, seen in this application for specific reasons which I think are relevant to what is before you in this report. Number 1, there was no consultation for this application, no site notices, and no contact with me, or as far as I can tell, with any of the some 110 local residents who had objected a year ago. It is only by chance that I heard about this application in time to speak today. I ask that the committee ask itself whether no consultation is correct or even community-minded. Number 2, this is the main reason I am objecting today. What the council approved a year ago was in fact a last-minute revision, making all the occupation to be all affordable housing. This was a change of occupancy and tenure from the original application, which was a mix of affordable at ground and first level and 3 levels above for commercial open market sale. I had objected a year ago to the fact that the revised application, which the council approved, had no justification for its revision to be 100% affordable, other than the statement it was revised. However, the justification running through the 110 documents which comprise the application you approved was predicated on the explanation by the developer that they had to intensely develop the site, take up the whole full footprint, which at present is not taken, because they had to make commercial value of the top floors to pay for the rest. This was clearly said to me by the developers' representatives at the public consultation event I attended at Queen's Club. However, with the commercial imperative removed, the basis to justify this over-intensity of development was gone. There was, and still is, a false premise for this overdevelopment of the site, which is that unlike a commercial developer, Southern Housing already owned the site and building. What you have in this report is economical with this truth under paragraph 2, relevant planning history. The justification for the footprint and bulk and density of occupation has been airbrushed out. Yet it also says in para 3.2 that the current proposal is a material change. What justification? But stop and think. What have we learned in the year of lockdowns and the impact of COVID on us? We who have stayed put on Palliser Road for the past year have learned that community is fragile, that this locality is indeed densely occupied already as it is. Such a development as proposed would cause greater harm and impact than it might have appeared before COVID. Can you use the opportunity now of this hiatus in the project to ask the applicant to go back to the drawing board and come back with either a green refit of the current structure or a new structure that respects the current footprint and massing and genuinely enhances the conservation area and our immediate neighborhood? Thank you. Sarah, over to you.
Hi. I live in Palliser Road, directly opposite Ada Lewis House. Thank you for making an exception and giving me permission to speak to the committee this evening. I appreciate it. I recognise that the matter before the committee is only to seek permission for affordable units to change to shared ownership units. I accept that. But since permission was first given over a year ago, we have had, I need not remind you, a pandemic. Times have changed. Now is an opportunity to think again about how we live and what is and is not beneficial to our community. The development was approved last time.
There's a minute remaining.
Despite over 100 objections, including the Hammersmith Society and the Fulham Society, but its one redeeming feature was that it was to be affordable housing. This amendment today is to change that, which in my opinion puts into question the whole project, yet there has been no proper consultation. The proposed development is in direct opposition to 2 of Hammersmith and Fulham Council's key commitments, a commitment to be people first, yet this will render homeless over 60 young people, many of whom are key workers at Charing Cross Hospital. If the purpose of shared ownership housing is to help give people a stable home, I can assure you that the role is already being fulfilled in the present building. Secondly, the council's stating intention is to be carbon neutral by 2030. You will have seen the Architect Journal's Retro First campaign, intended to encourage refurbishment rather than redevelopment. This is because refurbishment is the green option. Every kilo of concrete creates
Sarah, that's 5 minutes.
carbon dioxide.
Sarah, that's 5 minutes. Can you wrap up for me and just finish your point?
Thank you. So the sustainability argument is much stronger than it was before. Replacement in the existing sound buildings needs to be justified in terms of public benefit. So I urge you to defer this planning application and help Southern Housing find a better way to provide genuinely affordable housing instead of destroying mature trees and a building it already owns and has successfully let for many years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you to both of you for coming on to address committee this evening. Sarah, if I can just ask you to put your microphone on mute for me.
Of course, thank you.
And then it's up to you both. If you want to keep your cameras on, that's fine. But if you want to turn them off, that's fine as well. It's up to you. Okay, if I can move on to members' questions. Does any member have any questions about this application in front of us this evening? I'm going to give you a moment. Councillor Carmel, I can see your hand there. I'll come to you.
Thank you, Chair. Just a short comment. This is, as the speakers this evening have acknowledged, a relatively innocuous change to the permission that was granted. Since, however, as you members of this committee may recall, on balance, when we decided the application back in March last year, I voted against for a plethora of planning reasons. It would be hypocritical of me, however innocuous this application is, for me to change my vote. So I will be voting against this application.
Thank you, Councillor Carmel. Did you have anything further? No. Okay. Councillor Harcourt, can I come to you next?
Yeah, thank you. I just want to be clear that this application is purely dealing with the change of tenure of those particular units, because the two objectors who we've just listened to made some good, genuine points about the application, appear to be wanting us to effectively change or go back on the application that's already been granted permission. So can we just have clarity on that?
Yes, Councillor, it's Jacques here. I can confirm that the only change is for the London living rent units to change to shared ownership units.
Okay, thanks. What can I say? It does seem a fairly, to quote Councillor Carmel, innocuous change. I do have some concerns that it reduces access to some people, for a number of people perhaps, but overall I don't have any major problem with it.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Harcourt. Does any other member have any questions on this item at all? I can't see any hands, but I'm just going to give you a moment. No. Okay. No questions before I move on to the voting? Fine. Okay. In which case then, I'll now move on to the vote. So I'll be asking if each of the recommendations in the report are agreed, and then call on each member in turn to give their vote. So please respond with either for, against, or not voting. So if I can draw your attention to recommendation 1 in the report, also noting the addendum, and you can find that recommendation on page 94. And that recommendation reads that the committee resolved that the heads of terms for the planning application agreed by committee on 3rd of March 2020 to be varied to allow 9 affordable London living rent units to change to 9 affordable shared ownership units with a 60k household income cap, subject to the completion of a satisfactory legal agreement. So, Councillor Ahern.
For.
Councillor Harcourt.
For.
Councillor Harvey.
For.
Councillor Carmel.
Against.
Councillor Perez.
For.
Councillor Thorley.
Abstaining, Chair.
And I also vote for the recommendation. So that is that first recommendation agreed. If I can draw your attention to recommendation 2 in the report, noting the addendum, which you can also find on page 94, that reads, to authorise that the Chief Planning Officer, after consultation with the Head of Law and the Chair of the Planning and Development Control Committee, be authorised to make any minor changes to the proposed heads of terms of the legal agreement or conditions, which may include the variation, addition or deletion of conditions. Any such changes shall be within their discretion. So, Councillor Ahern. Councillor Ahern, can you hear me?
Right, 4.
Councillor Harcourt.
4.
Councillor Harvey.
4.
Councillor Carmel.
4.
Councillor Perez.
4.
Councillor Thorley.
4.
And I also vote for that recommendation. So that is that application approved. In which case then I will move us on to item number 5, which is the Plymley Place item. If I can please ask the presenting officer, Neil Edgerton, to please introduce the report. Thank you, Neil, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. Members of the committee may remember that the application was originally presented to committee on the 13th of October 2020. The committee deferred the decision to allow the applicants to explore the feasibility of reconsidering their arrangements for the setting up, taking down of the stalls and servicing throughout the day, in light of obviously concerns raised by local residents. The applicants have further investigated the proposals. I mean, I'm just showing the screen, obviously the existing stalls roughly in this location when they're trading, and the proposals to move it over to in front of Shepherd's Bush Station. Obviously, one of the concerns was that they were servicing the site from Stern Street and causing noise and disturbance for local residents. There was question raised about a taxi rank on Uxbridge Road, whether there was potential for that to be used. That has been looked at and discussed with our highways colleagues, who feel that the taxi rank is a very important feature for accessibility and for vulnerable people in terms of access to the underground and providing a safe, secure location to pick up a taxi that's covered by CCTV, and that it would not be feasible to use that. And we also sort of contemplated sharing, whether the bay could be shared. But again, there's concerns there. I mean, there's a significant number, obviously, of retail premises along Uxbridge Road here, all of which need to be serviced. And if there were to be, the bay could be shared at all, then there'd be no guarantee that there would be access for the market traders at the right time to unload, set up. The monitoring and the enforcement of the shared use of the bay would be very difficult. As such, we are back at committee. The applicants, the market team, have revised their plans, and to a certain degree, they still would be needing to locate be located in Stern Street in terms of setting down and taking up. However, they're proposing that they would reduce the unloading and loading time, and that the traders would, which is a florist and a fruit and veg stall, would agree to unload the vehicles set up between the hours of 8 o'clock and 9:30 each day, and they would stop the trading and load the vehicle at the end of the day between 5:30 and 7:30, with both traders to vacate the site by 7:30. It's also been established that there'd be no replenishing of the stalls would need to take place during the trading hours. All stock would be placed by the pitches, removed from the vehicle, put by the pitches when they set up, and the trader would then remove the vehicle from that area and park in a paid-for pay and display bay. We've had further clarity from the market team as well that the site will be monitored by the market team on 3 times a week basis to ensure compliance. The monitoring responsibility will be transferred to a new enforcement team that's coming into play on the 1st of April. Traffic wardens would also be informed of the arrangements for loading and unloading, would carry out regular checks. The traders would all have to sign updated terms and conditions bespoke for the site. Breaches of these would be enforced by the market team, and action would be sort of verbal warning and written warning, fixed penalty notices, and persistent breaches would then result in the revocation of the street trader's license. Furthermore, I mean, the stall was obviously being relocated from, I guess, in front of Plymley Place to in front of the tube station, would help to reduce noise and disturbance from during the actual trading hours from customers. The revised arrangements were shared with everybody who had commented on the original notifications. We received 2 objections from 2 of the residents, one who I believe is registered to speak tonight. And again, we got 2 letters of support from a couple of residents who are further down Stern Street in Boddington Court. Officers consider that, you know, the team have investigated alternative arrangements, and that it has not been possible to come up with any further solutions. Therefore, officers have brought the application back to committee with the recommendation that a permission is granted for 2 years. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Neil. If you can unshare your screen for me,
Yep.
Neil, thank you. All right, Sharon, thank you for coming along to Planning and Development Control Committee to speak to us this evening. You have 3 minutes in which to address committee, and I'll give you a bit of a warning when there's 30 seconds remaining. So whenever you're ready.
Yeah, I am ready. And I don't know whether you can remember, you and your colleagues can remember the objections that I and my neighbour rose on the last occasion, and if you have those in writing. But this actually is the anniversary of the 2 years that was given in the last planning application to see and ensure that there were no adverse effects occurring to the neighbouring properties, and that was would be in breach of the council's own policies. I don't want to rehash, but quickly remind you how appalling it is for me and my neighbours to have these large lorries coming up and down the small streets of Stern Street, dead-end street, difficulty in turning round, causing pollution and noise and, in fact, illegal parking. I note from what Mr. Edgerton says that it would appear to be that because the council can't find anywhere better for them to load and unload, it has to be dumped on Stern Street. And in my submission to you, I would suggest that is not the right approach to a planning application, because surely part and an essential part of this application is how these stores are to be loaded and unloaded. And I seem to remember on the previous strip of Hammersmith and Fulham, it used to say putting residents first. That seems to have disappeared from the strip that I can see now, but that's by the by. I am disappointed that the market teams haven't done slightly better in the last period of time since October to really properly investigate, for example, the taxi rank. And I note from what Mr. Edgerton has said that they haven't even inquired whether there is a possibility for some sharing for a relatively short period of time, so that perhaps one of the stores can load and unload from there. They haven't, the Highways Authority hasn't even been approached, looking at what Mr. Edgerton has said in his report. And he talks about, well, this is a vital taxi rank because people use it at night. Well, obviously that's rather a red herring, because these stores are not going to be loaded and unloaded at night. And there's never been any suggestion that the taxi rank, as in Mr. Edgerton's report, should
Sharon,
be
that's 30 seconds to go.
relocated anywhere else. I need to live my life. I need to be able to sleep. I need to be able to wake up when I wake up. My life should not be dictated to by a very badly planned application that no one really has thought through as to how these stalls are going to be serviced. And I think it's desperately unfair that my life, and I've been a resident of Hammersmith and Fulham for a good number of years, too many really, but I have been here for about 30 years, and I want to have literally a quiet enjoyment of my home. I don't want to have the danger that...
Sharon, can you wrap up for me there, please?
Yes, I will, and ask you to re-look at the objections that I raised originally, and I would ask you to find that there is substance in those recommendations. And also Mr. Edgerton's report, he suggests that maybe in the future, when the bus or the bike lane is decided, that,
Sharon, sorry, can you wrap up for me, please?
yes, that there will be an alternative to putting perhaps a loading bay where the buses are.
Great.
That's all I can say, really, but please let me live my life quietly without such disturbance.
Okay. Thank you very much, Sharon. If you want to pop your microphone on mute for me, and if you want to switch your camera off for us as well. If you can find the button. If not, one of our colleagues will be able to do that from our end instead. So don't worry if you can't find the button. Okay, Councillor Carmel, I can see your hand up. Did you want to kick us off with a question?
Let me start the video. Yes, thank you, Chair. If memory serves me correct, and I could be wrong, I think I was the one who proposed deferment of this application when it last came before us. I have to say that I'm not overly impressed by the additional information that has been provided by officers to support the original application. As let's reach for, I think, as I think it's Ms. Michaels said, and is referred to in paragraph 2.2 of the report. Just find the page. That the use of the taxi rank is not acceptable because of, I'm just finding, sorry, because that it is required for the nighttime use. Nowhere in this application can I see any reference to the market stalls having to be serviced during the late nighttime economy for this. And I would have expected better from the officers as a justification for approving this report. You know, coming out of COVID, we all want to see new businesses thrive and flourish, but the justifications included in this report, for me, are quite frankly not enough. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Carmel. I don't think we had a question, so I'm not going to ask Neil to address anything there, but I take your point. Does anyone else have any questions on this item at all? Councillor Thorley.
Thank you, Chair. It's just one very brief question. Reference is made in the report to the fact that other operators use the road behind Stern Street to load, unload, and service their businesses. What I really want to understand is do we give any weight to the kind of cumulative impact here? Obviously, we are being asked to agree to 2, potentially 3 additional stalls. What weight do we give to that, if any?
Do we have a highways colleague who's able to address that for us? Or Neil, are you able to take that?
I think probably more appropriate for a highways colleague.
Hi there. It's Lynn speaking from the highways.
Hi, Lynn.
Yeah, I can answer that. There are so many commercial retail and commercial properties that doing servicing deliveries in Stern Street right now. So it's not just the market stalls that are doing there. There are so many others as well. So by just reducing this application, it's not going to make any difference.
Okay. I mean, I think that you could always argue there's a tipping point. Yeah. I mean, you reference, you say, a large number of vehicles. Do we have any idea how many businesses have been serviced by that road? And yeah, if, as you do acknowledge, there are a large number of vehicles. Yeah, I appreciate in the report we say we've looked into the taxi ranks facility, but again, it would seem appropriate in the circumstances to try and look at alternatives. Were there really no other alternatives than what we've got before us?
I could, Chair, jump in. It's Matt Butler again, Head of Development Management. I could clarify. I mean, these are very important points that are being raised by committee members. I think that if our records did identify a significant issue in this particular area and certainly a level of complaints and disruption that this would obviously add to it, then we would certainly, that would weigh heavily against us supporting something like this. But again, to be quite open and frank, that our records don't identify currently an unacceptable impact. And that's not to say there's no impact at all. I'm sure Sharon and her other neighbour are, clearly experiencing some level of disturbance, but it's for us to determine where we feel it's unacceptable. When unlikely to ever have an impact where you have uses in London up against residential, where quite simply this is a strategic route, so it's challenging in terms of the restrictions that are there to provide formal loading and unloading facilities, and often you do get occasions where residential streets are being used, and we do have to monitor that carefully in respect of if there are levels of complaint, then we would seek not to accentuate, but that we don't consider that's a situation here, and certainly our records don't identify it as being a situation where we've reached that point. And I would add that we have looked at and we've investigated alternative loading and unloading arrangements in this area since the October committee, and looked at alternatives, and we discussed this issue in depth with our colleagues both in economic development who look after the market traders, and also in highways. Quite simply, there was no scope to utilise the taxi bay area even for temporary periods, or indeed other locations along Uxbridge Road, which, as I said, does operate as an important strategic route within our road network. I think more particularly in respect of the taxi bay, highways did highlight that the location and the capacity of this particular bay had been agreed between us and TfL after extensive work, and was particularly advantageous given its proximity to the tube station, and also with the increasing importance within the context of ensuring safe and secure access to taxis 24/7. And this is becoming increasingly important following the introduction of the 24-hour service to the underground. So highways did not want to see this important function of this particular taxi bay in particular compromised in any way. We did test that with them, and that was a firm position they did have. There would also be the challenges, as I think my colleague picked up on, of ensuring that any temporary use for unloading and loading wasn't taken advantage of by other businesses, and therefore there was the practicality of managing temporary uses of this nature and how we could enforce and ensure that they were only being used as we desired for these very short temporary periods. So there were a number of challenges, and we did test that, and we certainly did investigate as far as we could alternatives, and quite simply there weren't any.
Councillor Thorley, does that answer your question?
That does. I'd like to thank both officers for very detailed answers. Just one question then, I suppose, an observation, if I may, Chair. Officers respond to the people who have objected, saying these seem, in their opinions, reasonably long times for loading and unloading, stating they are broad hours to allow for getting to the site early, late, depending on traffic and so on. What, sorry, excuse me, what, in officers' opinion, will be the kind of normal unloading and loading times, just bearing in mind, obviously, that the window is reasonably broad at the moment? And then secondly, and it's more a comment, I note that obviously this is a time-limited application, and I know what you say about the limited levels of complaint. What would be quite interesting is if we were to see a subsequent application, if this were to be approved, was to get information from the market team in terms of enforcement, but also what they've seen on the ground, because I think that would be very, very interesting for the committee. So if I could just make that plea in effect. But say the question was related to the loading and unloading times.
I think it's not easy to, I guess, say exactly what the loading and unloading times would be. I understand from my colleagues in the market team that the florist takes quite a bit of time to set up, so it could be that they use, the majority of that setup time. The fruit and veg, I mean, it would only be guesswork, I'm afraid, and I wouldn't like to try and mislead you by making an assumption, but I mean, I think the flexibility is there more to allow them the opportunity to turn up on the site at a specific time, obviously with the start up of 8 o'clock being slightly later than it was before, to reduce the early morning disturbance. I certainly appreciate your point that if permission was granted, that a record or reference be kept of what is discovered by the markets team, and I certainly think that would be a useful information to have if there were any further subsequent applications.
Thank you, Chair. That's all for me.
Sorry, I can see we've got...
Sorry.
Hi, go ahead.
I manage the markets team from economic development. I think
what's your name, sorry?
Sorry, Nikki Burgess, and I'm from economic development. Apologies.
Hi, Nikki.
I think for the flower stall, it does take them some considerable time to load and unload. And so I think I believe they've requested they would use most of that time. They would be coming in later and leaving earlier, and within the restricted time, which they would have to abide to help for the residents. But I'm not sure that the florist can actually reduce that time, and they're really doing it within the margins, and also they're not going to top up their stall at any time in the day. So thank you.
Thank you, Nikki.
Sorry, Chair, can I just come back on that, if that's okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Nikki, that was actually one of the questions I wanted to ask, is because there is this condition on there about no restocking during the day, that obviously does add to the burden at the start of the day. In your view, is that the right, and I appreciate it may not be your place to say, but is that the right balance to strike here, if you will, kind of having that more noise and disturbance when there is, of course, the hustle and bustle of what's going on with people going to work at that time and so on, rather than having, if you will, the prolonged pain of loading and unloading throughout the day? I'm thinking more of the fruit and veg people as well, because I imagine the same problem for them.
Yeah, but I think definitely actually more with a flower stall, and they just want to make sure their vehicles are therefore not in Stern Street at any other time. So they're there for an hour and a half in the morning and they're there for an hour and a half in the evening. We will monitor that closely. We will get parking control to monitor that closely as well. And if they fail to follow, then they will lose their license. So they'll have to meet the recommendations for this planning. They'll have to sign up to it.
Thank you. Very clear. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Thorley. Councillor Perez, I can see you've had your hand up for a while now, so if I can come to you next.
Thank you, Chair. What about the size of the vehicles used for them bringing their products or their flowers? Ms. Michaels referred to lorries. Is there a way in which we can reduce the size of the vehicle so that the impact is reduced?
I think it'd be very difficult, I think, to specifically limit the size of the vehicles. I mean, I understand it's a large van they're using. I mean, it's what I've sort of seen when I was on the site, obviously some time ago now, when I was able to move around. I think there was a. So I think I've got. Oh, hang on. I think. Sorry, I need to share the screen.
While Neil's doing that, if they are large vans, they're not lorries.
Yeah. I mean, I think the image here, which is from some time ago, sorry, I'm trying to get it full screen. So that sort of shows I think that was the fruit and veg person unloading, I believe. So I mean, I think, as far as I'm aware, there's vehicles of that size that I have certainly witnessed loading and unloading for the stalls.
Oh, Councillor, I think you're on mute. Can you find your button?
Thank you. No, just to go back to, thank you, Mr. Edgerton. Just to go back to Nikki, did she say that they were vans, not lorries then?
Apologies, looking at that is a lorry, but it's a small lorry. It's not like a super-sized lorry. I mean, lorries come in different sizes.
It's not like an articulated lorry you would see on a motorway, for example.
No.
Just a follow-up question, please, or separate question. So we've heard from the presentation how the markets team will be monitoring the process, but what mechanisms are in place for residents in case they want to raise any concern or issue about the way the stores are operating?
I mean, if residents had concerns, they would be able to contact the market team with their complaints. We also have our public protection team who have details and will investigate complaints about noise and disturbance. So I mean, there is certainly opportunities to approach the council and report these issues happening, which can then be sort of investigated properly.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I'm just going to jump in again. We appreciate all the challenges for this application. So for it to go forward, if it's approved, the stall holders will absolutely have to abide by the conditions. And if they do not, then we will act.
Okay.
And in terms of the monitoring, is that on specific? I mean, I'm just thinking if residents, for example, have got video footage of an issue with a lorry, is that type of evidence, I mean, count for you in terms of addressing any concern as well that they may have?
Oh, sorry. I think I can't use my video. Yes, that would count as evidence, especially if they've got the times.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor, thank you, Councillor Perez. Councillor Harvey, if I can come to you next.
Okay. Yeah, following on from those questions, when I actually look at the conditions, it doesn't specifically say that the lorries, vans, whatever, can't come before 8 o'clock. And just bearing in mind what Sharon said about being woken up at 7 o'clock by the lorries, is there anything that we can do to stipulate that actually the lorries shouldn't arrive before 8 o'clock in the conditions? Because there's nothing really to stop them turning up at 7:30, 7 o'clock and sitting around for an hour.
So are the lorries able to arrive, or the vans able to arrive before their unloading time is the question, essentially, Councillor. Neil or Nikki, are either of you able to take that one for us?
Yeah, I mean, certainly looking at the condition, it obviously talks about the use of the stalls between 8 and 7, and they should only be set up before the hours of 8 to 9:30. Well, I'm sure we certainly could investigate that. I mean, enforcing it could be difficult. I'm not sure if legal would have a view on that.
Sorry, through the chair, it's Matt. We do have a condition 5, which regards the delivery and servicing arrangements, and something could potentially be incorporated within that if it's not explicit at the moment, if committee so wished.
What page is that on for us, Matt, please? Condition 5?
Page 23.
Okay. All right, so at the moment it says...
So, Chair, paragraph 3 talks about the stalls being set up.
Mm-hmm.
Paragraph 5 talks about the setup and takedown time.
Mm-hmm.
Refers to delivery and servicing, but not specifically the point that I raised.
Yeah, so actually, Matt, condition 5 doesn't actually have any times specified. Am I right?
That's right. Well, I mean, I haven't got the detail of the servicing and delivery to hand, but we could seek to ensure that our committee so wish that we include, reword, sorry, tongue-tied, we reword the condition to stipulate that there would be controls of the nature that committee are discussing now in terms of when vehicles can and can't turn up.
Okay. Nikki, is that workable from your team's perspective?
Oh, yes.
Okay, and then Councillor Harvey, can you point me towards paragraph 3 is on
page 22 at the bottom.
Thank you. Okay, yeah, fine, thank you. Okay, so what actually, it's probably more condition 3 that we want to vary then, if we're actually saying that we don't want vehicles to arrive before 8 a.m. and 5:30. So I think that's what we're talking about essentially. Is there any member who wants to propose that kind of amendment to condition 3?
I'll propose it, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Harvey's just had her hand up. So Councillor Ahern, would you like to second that? Oh,
Yeah,
sorry. Great. Okay, so what we're saying there essentially is for condition 3 is that vehicles to arrive no earlier than 8 a.m. for setup and no earlier than 5:30 for pack down, basically. Okay, so we'll come back to that when we move on to the voting, but thank you for that. Councillor Harvey, was there anything else that you wanted to ask?
No.
Okay, thank you. All right, Councillor Carmel, I can see you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And if I might be permitted to say good evening to Nikki, it's been several years, I think, since we've spoken. The committee report and the local objectors refer to the need for the taxi rank to aid the nighttime economy. In your opinion, as sort of head of markets, would it be feasible for the taxi rank to be used in the early morning and in the early evening for setup and takedown without impinging on the nighttime economy need for the taxi rank late at night?
I don't think the taxi, I think that perhaps having the nighttime economy in the report was probably, it's about the taxi rank being accessible for people all the time, all you know, every day. It's not just about the nighttime economy. Lots of people use taxis. And I think that the amount of time the stallholders will take to load and unload is too long for the taxi rank not to be in use. I support what my highways colleagues say.
Well, I'm sorry, could you point me to the paragraph in the report that refers to any other time apart from the nighttime economy? Because I must have missed that.
I think it does say that it's in use, but yes, I agree. That would have perhaps not, it'd been better not to have had that in the report. But I think that highways colleagues believe that taxi rank should be accessible to people every day at all times.
Thank you, Nikki. Councillor Carmel, do you have anything further on that?
Yes. And I have a motion to move as well. Notwithstanding that it's very unusual, and I think perhaps, well, and certainly in my memory, unprecedented, given that the report says that the taxi rank is only important for the nighttime economy, I'm going to suggest a second deferment so we can get clarity on this, because if we can use the taxi rank without impinging on the sanity of local residents, I think that this is something that we have to be very clear before we take a decision. And I am going to propose a second deferment so we can get absolute clarity on the availability of not disturbing the quiet enjoyment of the residents of Stern Street and the possible use of the taxi rank, because the report does not seem to preclude this.
Does anyone want to second Councillor Carmel's?
Could I just interject just a second, sorry, before?
Go ahead.
The report also talks about that there's no suitable locations in the immediate vicinity that could accommodate a taxi bay which operates at all times. So it's not, you know, whilst the wording does include talks about the nighttime economy, it is not solely related to the nighttime economy.
Thank you, Mr. Edgerton. Pertinent and to the point as always. But as I'm sure you'll agree, there is a dichotomy in the report, and I would like to have, you know, absolute clarity as to the effects of saving the residents of Stern Street as opposed to potentially minor or potentially major or potentially median effects on the taxi rank. And we do not have the evidence before us to make that decision. So I am going to propose a second deferment of this report.
Would anyone like to second Councillor Carmel's proposal for a second deferment? Is that you, Councillor Thorley, your second?
I'm happy to do that, Chair.
Okay, well, can I suggest that for the time being, we carry on with the discussion and we can take a vote if we need to on a proposal for a second deferment at the end, in advance of voting on the amendment to condition 3. So let's come to that at the end. Before we get on to that, Councillor Carmel, did you have any other questions?
No, I think we discussed pretty much everything the last time the report came through, and it went for deferment.
Great. Okay. Councillor Ahern, you had your hand up earlier, and it's gone now. I'm wondering if you...
The question was answered. I was going to ask, are there any complaints about the other lorries using it? And the answer was there has been no complaints.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Okay, can I, before we move on to Councillor Carmel's proposal, can I just take some advice from legal? Do we just need a standard normal vote on the proposed motion to defer? Gertrude, are you able to give us some advice on that?
Yes, I think, Chair, you are correct. It needs to be a proper vote on Councillor Carmel's suggestion for second.
Okie dokie. Thank you very much, Gertrude. Okay, in which case then, so take it. I'm here seeing from you that members. Sorry, my words. Does anyone have any other questions before we move on? No. Okay. In which case then, I'll kick us off with a vote on whether we wish to defer this application for a second time. So I'll come to Councillor Ahern first.
Against.
Councillor Harcourt?
Against.
Councillor Harvey?
Against.
Councillor Carmel, you're going to tell me you're for, so just give me a nod. Great. Councillor Perez?
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Thorley, you as well? Just great. And I vote against that recommendation. So that's the Councillor Carmel's suggestion that we have a deferment again of this application, and that is not carried. So what I'll do now is I'm going to move on to the amendment to condition 3, which was proposed by Councillor Harvey. Sorry, Councillor Carmel, I can see you're waving your fist at me.
Sorry, could I just ask a quick question of Ms. Burgess about the proposed amendment? I meant to do it earlier and it slipped my mind.
The amendment to condition 3?
The amendment to condition 3.
Yeah.
In your opinion, is the hours allowed for setup? Because you mentioned that setting up the flower stall takes considerable time. Would that be workable and viable for the flower shop operator?
I think I already asked that question, but go ahead, Nikki.
I'm not sure we got a definitive answer because they were separate questions.
Okay, we've got emails from both traders confirming that they will only load and unload between their times.
Great. And so what we're asking for in that condition is that they arrive. I won't repeat myself. So what Councillor Harvey's amendment to condition 3 is suggesting is that vehicles for the loading and unloading, for the kind of setup and pack down, that vehicles arrive no earlier than 8 AM for setup, and that they arrive no earlier than 5:30 for pack down. So that is the amendment to condition 3. So again, I'm just going to come to each of you in turn. So Councillor Ahern.
For.
Councillor Harcourt.
For.
Councillor Harvey. Councillor Carmel.
For.
Councillor Perez.
For.
Councillor Thorley.
For.
And I also vote for that recommendation. So that is that amendment to condition 3 Agreed. Okay, I'm moving on now to recommendation 1 in the report, which you can find on page 22, considering the new amendment we've just made to condition 3. And that recommendation reads that the committee resolve that the Chief Planning Officer be authorised to grant temporary planning permission subject to the conditions listed below. So, Councillor Ahern.
4.
Councillor Harcourt.
4.
Councillor Harvey.
4.
Councillor Carmel.
Against.
Councillor Perez.
4.
Councillor Thorley.
Against.
And I also vote for that recommendation. So if I can therefore draw your attention to recommendation 2 in the report, also on page 22, bearing in mind the amendment to condition 3, and that reads that the committee resolves that the Chief Planning Officer, after consultation with the Head of Law and the Chair of the Planning and Development Control Committee, be authorised to make any minor changes to the proposed conditions, which may include the variation, addition or deletion of conditions. Any such changes shall be within their discretion. So, Councillor Ahern.
4.
Thank you very much. Councillor Harcourt.
4.
Councillor Harvey.
4.
Councillor Carmel.
4.
Councillor Perez.
4.
Councillor Thorley.
4.
And I also vote for that recommendation. So that is that recommendation agreed and that application approved. So thank you very much. In which case then we're going to move on to our final item for the evening, which is the land at Guinness Trust Estate, the tree preservation order. So if I can ask the presenting officer, Adam O'Neill, to please introduce the report. And Adam, I'll give you a moment to just share your screen.
Thank you, Chair. If you can see my presentation now. The tree preservation order relates to 8 trees on the Guinness Trust estate in the Hammersmith Odeon Conservation Area. The trees consist of 3 maple trees and 5 London planes. They are large trees, and the tree preservation order was stimulated by a Conservation Area Tree Works notice received by the council in relation to the proposed felling of 5 of the trees. This is a northern group of trees 1 to 4, and these are adjacent to the service road to the left and the playground to the right. This is a photograph of the trees in winter, which shows the shielding effect that they have from the flyover and the office buildings beyond. Trees 5 to 8 are in a southern group just to the south of the playground. And this is a shot in winter to show the impact that those trees have. The tree preservation order has been subject to 2 representations from a resident of Guinness Trust estate who has raised concerns about the condition of the wall at the back of St Augustine's Church, which you can see on your screens now, potential damage to the service road, which you can see on this image, and raising of pavements, as well as shading to the playground and leaf fall. The Guinness Trust estate have provided us with an arboricultural report in respect of trees T1 to T4, which recommends that the wall to St Augustine should be taken down, rebuilt, that the service road should be relaid with a deeper foundation, and that the paving stones can be repaired. On that basis, officers consider that the trees have significant amenity value. This is a view of the tree canopy, which is visible in long views from Fulham Palace Road. And officers consider that the tree preservation order should be confirmed without modification, and that's the officer recommendation.
Okay, thank you very much, Adam. Okay, in which case then, do members have any comments or questions on this application? I'm going to give you just a moment. Councillor Harcourt.
Can we just pop back to, there's a photo of the wall.
Yep.
And one bit where there's the cracking.
So there's a long L-shaped section of wall at the back of St Augustine's Church, which we understand belongs to the Guinness Trust. They are currently investigating carrying out repairs to it. The wall is evidently cracked. It has buddleia growing out of it. And that's the condition of the wall for its entire length, not just in the areas adjacent to the trees. So this is the southern section where the buddleia seems to have caused some damage.
Yeah, because
And,
just looking at that, I'm trying to see where the trees are in relation to that, vertical
so
crack.
the trees are just to the right there. You can see the branches of the trees on just next to the paving stones. But then further down, there's another section of wall which is leaning out, and that's well beyond where the trees are. We have asked the Guinness Trust for a structural survey of the wall. They haven't been able to provide us with one within the time frame for the committee. Officers are happy to continue discussions with the Guinness Trust about how the wall could be repaired as part of any application to carry out works to the trees once the TPO is confirmed.
Yeah, it's just going through, in the section, whatever it is, 3.2 on page 14, it lists all the things that are wrong with that wall. And, is it really being claimed that the trees are responsible for all of those conditions of the wall?
No, I don't think anybody is claiming that the trees are responsible for it. The arboricultural report sets out a number of potential reasons. They would need to be investigated further by a thorough structural survey, but it appears that that the wall is in such bad condition that it would need to be taken down regardless of whether or not the trees stayed or were felled. So it's unlikely that the trees are going to cause any more damage to the wall than already exists.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Adam. Thank you, Councillor Harcourt. Does anyone else have any other questions on this application? I'm going to give you a moment to raise your hands if you want to. Councillor Carmel? Oh, I think you need to unmute yourself, Councillor.
I need to unmute as well. Can I, just for the point of clarity, confirm something that is not strictly relevant, but will be useful for the committee going forward? That although I think it's been agreed that the trees are not causing damage to the wall, that were we to put a TPO on and were the trees to be causing the damage, that the cost of repairs or obeying with the TPO fall solely on the landowner. And so we would be imposing a financial burden on the landowner were we to agree this TPO.
Well, the situation is by the applicant's arboricultural report and their own admission that the wall needs to be taken down and the road was built with very shallow foundations and needs to be relaid, and the paving stones need to be relaid as well. So in effect, the costs have already been incurred by whatever has caused the damage over the last few years. The council would not be responsible for bearing the cost of that damage because it's damage that's already occurred. The only instance in which the council might become liable for any damage would be if we were to refuse an application to fell the trees and that further damage occurred, and that damage was entirely foreseeable. Now, in this situation, the damage has already been done to the road and the wall, and therefore that work needs to be done. So I don't think there is any risk of liability from the council's point of view.
I'm grateful, Mr. O'Neill, and with your permission, Chair. As far as I can see, the damage to the wall is caused by the buddleia and other plants that might be growing up within it. But I don't think it's been specifically answered. Is the damage to the road purely down to the trees? And as and when the road is repaired, if the damage is caused by the trees, is it likely that further damage will ensue once the trees continue to grow?
So in relation to the surface of the road, it appears that the trees were planted and the service road was laid with a very shallow foundation. It would have been foreseeable that that shallow foundation would not have been appropriate to lay in a location where the trees could grow to that size and tree roots could develop. So in relation to the damage that's already occurred, the council would not be liable for that, and a deeper foundation, a deeper surface could avoid the potential for those tree roots to cause any problems in the future. And we'd be happy to have discussion with the Guinness Trust about how that could be arranged.
I'm grateful, and just to clarify things in my mind, if the tree roots are close enough to the surface to cause damage to the road surface with the shallow foundations, would deeper foundations, in your opinion, have the possibility of damaging the viability of the trees?
So the arboricultural report recommends that the surface be relaid with a thicker surface. So I think it's more a case of building up the surface of the road rather than necessarily excavating deeper, because then that would affect the tree roots. So the arboriculturalist's advice is to build up.
I'm grateful. That's fine. That's fine. You've answered perfectly. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Adam. Councillor Carmel, did you have anything further?
I think my fears have been allayed.
Wonderful. Does any other member have any questions on this application? I'll just give you a moment in case anyone wants to put their hand up. I'm not seeing any hands. Okay. In which case then, I'm going to move on to the vote. So I'll be asking if the recommendation in the report is agreed, then call on each member in turn to give their vote. Please respond with either for, against, or not voting. So if I can draw your attention to recommendation 1 in the report, which you can find on page 12. And that reads that the tree preservation order be confirmed without modification. So, Councillor Ahern.
For.
Councillor Harcourt.
For.
Councillor Harvey. For. Councillor Carmel.
For.
Councillor Perez.
For.
Councillor Thorley.
For.
And I also vote for the recommendation. So that is that recommendation agreed, and that's TPO approved. So that brings us to the end of our business for this evening. I'd like to thank everyone for attending or watching tonight's meeting, to all of our registered speakers and to all of the officers who were able to provide us with all of the information we needed this evening. The draft minutes of this meeting will be published on our website shortly. These will be formally approved at our next meeting, which takes place on the 20th of April. If you have any queries concerning the applications in the interim, please contact the case officer in the application report. Thank you very much.